Welcome to the next edition of Works with DW Spectrum. This afternoon, we are lucky to be joined by Nirovision and Eliana Bettio with Nirovision. Eliana, why don't you go ahead and just tell us about Nirovision?
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here with you to showcase Nirovision, and I hope you and everyone who's watching, whether that's live or recorded, have an entertaining session. And please feel free to ask anything that's not clear, like you said as well. So I'm here to talk to you about Nirovision. We'll do a quick intro about the platform, and then I listed a few of the use cases we've been getting more traction on recently, to give the audience and everyone who's watching us ideas into how you can implement this type of technology in HK facilities, in manufacturing and logistics plants, and any sort of essential services, offices that are still open, offices and workplaces, and so forth. And then I'll jump to explain what we have released in the version 1.6 of the plugin that we're presenting, and I'll demo the DW Spectrum platform as well. So questions and answers, feel free to stop me at any time. I'm not looking at the chat window, but the team on site is, so send them through. My name is Eliana, and I work at Nirovision as a product manager. We're a Sydney-based company. We're a small team of 20 engineers that work around machine learning, mobile applications, and distributed systems. Our algorithms and the technology we developed is designed and developed in Australia, and it's proprietary by us. We don't come from the security industry per se. We come from the software industry, and we started Nirovision 2 years ago with the proposition of using deep learning to identify people using security cameras. And that last point is the one that I want to highlight in this conversation, because we studied down the security path by looking at the motion or at the person classification and the typical old school classification algorithms that were yielding a lot of false alarms. And that's how we started with an on-site machine learning team developing our own algorithms. We started with person classification, we developed facial recognition, and we evolved the product from just the facial recognition pipeline into what we call an identity recognition platform. So to give you a rundown of what we mean by that, we think Nirovision is a great tool to keep track of people that are around your premises. And by keeping track, and I mean, I'm referring to what we say by identity, I mean not only matching faces to a database, but we think identities are beyond faces and names. They are your behaviors, they are your preferences, they are notes or information that are relevant about you, and managing all that, managing what we consider someone's identity is what we want Nirovision to do. But of course, it involves a facial recognition pipeline. That pipeline is comprised from way more algorithms than just the matching exercise. So tracking faces across frames, liveness detection, and any other sort of smarts that you can add to the pipeline itself to make it more comprehensive. And it's a platform because it's not a solution, even though it's a standalone solution by itself, it becomes even more powerful when you connect it to the tools of choice. And that is whether you want to plug it into a database to create your identities automatically, or you want to push your metadata down the pipeline to DW Spectrum, for example, to have to store that metadata for as long as your footage retention allows you to, and to address whatever is going on by setting up real-time notifications. So that's why Nirovision is a little bit more than facial recognition itself. We want to be great at creating identities, and we want to be great at giving you tools to make your model work even better and to reach the accuracy levels that you want the implementation to have. So with COVID, of course, and all our 2020 plans a bit messed up since it happened, we studied down the path of investigating what was the state of thermal technology. Mainly because our customers were reaching out to us, asking us if we could do something about it, mostly around making the technology less ephemeral, more accurate, and enhance the investment that this piece of hardware requires, because thermal cameras are generally on the rather expensive side. So we started investigating what the possibilities were, and we ended up integrating with a few thermal camera models. So we're syncing that metadata into Nirovision. And once we sync that metadata and we mix it into our facial recognition pipeline, you start getting the possibility of actioning this information. And you can action it by setting up an absolute threshold alarm. That is an alarm that's triggered whenever someone is reading 37.5 or more, for example, so a definite number. But if you combine facial recognition technology with temperature measurement, you are tracking individuals through multiple times of the day and across multiple days, especially if it's places where people come repeatedly. So by virtue of using facial recognition technology and combining thermal, we start learning about what the individual's temperature is and looks like. So not only do you get the ability to trigger an alarm at a defined temperature, we can also measure deviations from individuals' temperatures as well. And that's what this image is illustrating. So we added smarts to the way we process the temperature read from the camera, and we're able to track people more precisely. So this is, of course, the work that we've done recently and the most recent features. But in the same spirit, we want metadata and identities to behave this way. If you want to sync information from another system into Nirovision or push information out of Nirovision, you can use this metadata to put together these identities and this notion of identities in the system. So jumping to concrete use cases or some of the conversations we've been having recently that I hope spark your imagination, aged care facilities are among the ones that have struggled the most with this virus around us, mostly, of course, because of the propensity of residents to contract the virus and to have complications based on them. So aged care facilities worldwide have been strengthening their security procedures and mostly trying to make sure that visitors that show up to visit residents don't bring the virus with them. So depending on the country, and I'm being vague on purpose here because it's difficult to be precise when it comes to legislation, and I'm imagining we have audiences from all over the world, so please be mindful that your local legislation may allow you to do up to one point, and allow me to be flexible enough to just mention this in general. So at least in Australia, aged care facilities are required to register information regarding every visitor that shows up, and that information includes immunization records, the answer to a few questions regarding whether that person has been abroad or not, how often or how late they've been sick. So storing that information and of course measuring people's temperatures as they come to the venue are two things that aged care facilities weren't ready for. So they've been using our metadata fields to store the information to those questionnaires. And they also been using our identity platform to keep track of who's visiting who, what family member they are here to see, if they are approved or not, and trigger real-time alerts in the case of an unusual read. But at the same time, aged care facilities deal with other types of problems beyond abnormal temperature reads. One of them is violent orders that could come from other family members or even patients sometimes, rarely, but sometimes. So they need a way to enforce blacklists, and that is triggering a real-time alert whenever someone that's listed under an AVO is seen on the platform. And that real-time alert gets the form of a push notification or an email message, but it also could be displayed using one of our most recent developed features, which is a display kiosk that you can set up using an iPad or lives on the cloud, or so you can set it up using another tablet. And that display kiosk has privacy features embedded in them, so you can write a message. So in this case, the message says access denied because there was a recognition result that from an identity that belonged to the blacklist. And you can choose to display faces, names, and labels, or keep this display to be as private as possible, but give real-time feedback to the person that's coming to the venue without having to have a human interact with them. This layout is fully customizable, and I'm going to show you in another use case another way of setting it up. But the biggest thing that aged care venues have been dealing with, and facial recognition technology is great for this, is the problem of dementia patients that wander around whenever, and that happens usually in facilities that have staff shared across multiple floors. Sometimes, sadly, a staff member loses track of a patient, and statistics are not on the patient's side when it comes to being a wanderer. There's a very high number, which I can't fully remember, but something like the chances of survival if a patient wanders beyond 24 hours are very slim. So you want to try to find them as soon as possible. And if you have cameras that are scattered around the aged care residency, you could trigger a real-time alert if a person is seen at an unauthorized area. You could choose to close the door, for example, if you have facial recognition linked to an access control setup, or you can just build a very complex notification workflow and maybe ping the resident that's assigned to that patient, the nurse station at the end of the hallway, and the security guard at the front desk if someone like this is seen around. So ultimately, what I'm getting to is the ability of making sure that you know who's in and who's out at all times, and the ability to react to that information. And when we jump to DW Spectrum, I'm gonna be very precise into what information we're thinking through, so you know what you can achieve on the platform as well. In terms of other types of companies, and I call these essential services, but what I mean ultimately is plants and big office spaces that have a recurrent traffic of employees mostly, as opposed to aged care residencies that are monitoring mainly visitors. So when we see repeated traffic over a repeated number of days and across multiple times of the days, so this graph that you see over here is where we can start building this person's baseline. And by doing some data science around the figures that we get from the camera, so the camera is the one that's actually measuring the temperature. And I'm saying that because it's very important that these thermal cameras are configured properly. And part of my job is to make sure that when the camera is implemented, the settings of that camera are optimal for facial recognition to work as expected, and for Nirovision to be able to sync that information through. But once that camera is set up, then we can start tracking an individual across different times of the day, and we can start alerting, like for example in this scenario, upon a deviation of individual baseline instead of just following a general guideline. So the added benefit of that is technically measuring someone's fever implies measuring someone's deviation against its own temperature instead of just an absolute threshold. And the camera itself, if it's properly calibrated, it also calibrates itself every 5 minutes. So you have to have it in a place that doesn't have a breeze and that doesn't have a lot of different changes in temperature. But the camera itself will also adjust to it as it calibrates. So these type of use cases, so a big number of employees that are coming to the office every day, they can get their temperatures measured in a completely unmanned manner when the camera is there, and they get the real-time alerts. But the other problem they have also is, of course, if this is a big plant, there are changes of shifts, and changes of shifts mean a big burst of activity on a short span of time. So imagine if you have to guide that traffic through a determined area in order for them to be measured by the camera as the camera indicates, then you can create pretty easily bottlenecks in employee traffic, slow down the check-in and check-out times, and I don't have to continue to list the downsides of it. So our display kiosk put in an area where people's temperatures is being measured could include instructions to guide employees through this flow of measurement, or to indicate, for example, what to do if there is an abnormal read and follow the company's procedure. So most of the companies we work with have a secondary temperature check done by an in-ear or another type of thermometer after 15 minutes of the initial read. So giving those instructions to your staff could guarantee that the flow of everyday life is disrupted the least possible. And of course, the same features regarding privacy and what you want this to do, whether it shows a notification with sound or it's just a silent display with or without faces, it's fully customizable. Aside from that, there's also the requirement, of course, if there's a problem with someone contracting this virus, you have to provide evidence as to where that person has been. And I say person, but ultimately that also means surfaces, because sadly we know this little bug is very resilient to surfaces, and it can stay alive for a bit. So knowing where people have been, to know who they've interacted with and who in what areas of the company or the venue have been around, becomes very crucial for contact tracing capabilities. So of course, as a facial recognition provider, we have those data points. So we can start, and we've started displaying, whenever there's two people that are seen in frame, a nearby section that shows who's been in frame with who, and list that in individual profiles. So then you can quickly find all these people that have been in contact with whoever you're following around. And I'm talking about the current times, but ultimately gaming venues have to do incident reports in a similar fashion. Restaurants and hotels do something similar as well. So whenever you have to draw back someone's steps, this comes very handy. And you can achieve similar functionality on DW Spectrum as well by using the information we sync through in terms of events and objects. So surfaces and people is what we've discussed. There's one more thing or one more use case that I want to bring up before I jump into Nirovision and show you around, which I'm sure is what you're all waiting for. So in terms of offices and workplaces, one of the topics that has come up quite often is I need to know who's in my venue at all times, right? If there is the need to evacuate, if I need to make everyone aware of something that's going on, it comes very handy, especially if you're thinking of a venue that is scattered over multiple office floors or huge. We have quite a few co-working spaces that are pretty huge in size, and sometimes it's very hard for people that are around and the community managers to know which members are in. So we started exposing how many people we've seen in your venue in the last 24 hours. And of course, we exposed as well the analytics of every recognition result throughout your retention. And if you have DW Spectrum in the mix, that retention is as long as your footage lasts. So being able to get a high-level view of where your traffic comes from, and this is all using Nirovision labels. So this is grouping identities by groups you define and you choose the colors for to guide the visualizations around the app. And it could quickly tell you again who's around. But the main problem that we've been having with offices and workplaces is facial recognition requires identities to be created beforehand. And you'll see that identities in Nirovision are comprised of faces and metadata. But sometimes companies are lucky to have an employee database with photos that could be brought into the system. But of course, you have to do the import job. Sometimes we do an integration with database or a CRM, for example, to bring this information from. But ultimately, what I mean is it takes a while to be up and running. And offices were reaching out to us, calling and saying, we need this technology now, right? We need to open as soon as possible. At least here we're about to reach stage 1 finally. So it looks like slowly economic activity is picking up and people are coming back to their workplaces. So being able to get the workplace set up and running quickly has been very key. And we released an import tool to help you with that. And even though it sounds very trivial, the import tool can show you not only the faces that you are uploading, but we also run recognition against the current state of your model in the cloud. So if you happen to be uploading a face of an individual whose identity is already in the system, we can let you know about that. We let you label them at one go and also create metadata as well. So you can really set up your company within minutes. And something to highlight at this point, coming back to what we were discussing before about identity recognition and what we want Nirovision to do, these type of tools is what we want to be able to build, something that could help you as an integrator or your end customer to have a project be done quickly and to start protecting the people that that need it quickly as well. In a general view, I've shown you a few features, but to tell you the complete product suite that Nirovision is comprised of, we have iOS and Android apps. We launched Nirovision last year at ISC West. Guys, remember when we did trade shows? They were fun. So the apps have been around for, well, Nirovision has been around for over a year now. We won a few awards around these apps, and we developed also a desktop web app that you can access. So let me take a chance, exit my slides and jump straight to my platform, just confirming that everyone can see my screen. Please let me know if otherwise. All good?
We're good.
So perfect.
Yep.
So what you're seeing here is, this is my demo setup. This is my identity database, so I have almost 200 identities in this demo setup. What you see on the left are labels. So if you had a myriad of identities and you wanted to quickly find people that are grouped in a certain way, you can filter by label. And labels are this feature that we use to group identities, and you can create as many as you want. This is the way my identity looks in the system. So you should see that it's comprised of more than just a single face. I have faces from the cameras. I have uploaded faces, selfies from my cell phone. You can use any face that you want for it. Of course, it has to have certain qualities, because this is, let's never forget that facial recognition system is garbage in, garbage out. There's no way around it. Your identities need to be of good quality in order for them to yield good quality results. But as soon as you collect a few faces, and you choose to identify this identity by name or ID, you can start adding labels and grouping people using them, and you'll see the colors then being reflected throughout the app. And then you can start creating metadata as well. So for example, these are all manually filled fields, but this could be populated by a CRM, a point of sale system, a CMS, any system of your choice. So I have nodes, employee number, you can use a date, you can store a favorite drink, for example, or some access level. And to your right, you're gonna see the historical trace of every time I was seen around the apps, around the cameras, sorry, that are paired to my accounts. So you can see me walking around this morning, ever since I came to the office, yesterday, and so forth. And every clip is playable. And at the bottom here, you can see what my baseline looks like. So of course, I have quite a few measurements of myself and quite repeated thermal reads ever since we started testing this camera. So I have already a baseline, and I could trigger a baseline alarm based on what my individual temperature looks like. But taking a step back, this is what the activity view of Nirovision looks like once you take a step back and a high-level view of what your activity is. So you can quickly see I can use all the same labels we were looking at to filter activity. And this becomes important because these labels are going to be synced into DW Spectrum. So you can use labels not only to search through the notification, the objects panel, but you can also use labels in the caption field of rules to trigger an alarm upon a specific label. And you see a few examples here of our security guard in the office. You can see we pick him up quite in the lifts, very far away from IR mode, and that's because his identity looks good. He has a few examples of faces from different lights, different sizes as well, even an IR one. So aside from being able to filter and explore your activity, a few things that I want to show you are we want to be very good at discriminating your traffic. We want to be able to tell you very quickly how many known people we've seen and how many people we couldn't match we've seen. So we start grouping activity then between matched and unmatched for you to explore. And we get very smart about what we do with your unknowns. And this is something that I want to show you because I've never seen this before. We can distinguish your known from your unknown traffic. And what we could do also is group your unknown traffic over time. So in the case of this particular person, for example, she's been in my venue 32 times. So she's not in my identity database. I don't know who she is yet, but she's been around. So that could mean she's interested in my product. It could mean that she has had a problem in my venue. In any case, the fact that she's been around may be either a reason of concern or it may be a great qualified lead that you need to address. But classifying your unknown traffic to make it easy for you to find people of interest is what we want Nirovision to help you do. And that's where this feature comes from. But we also know that real life scenarios rarely look like my very neat and sharp profile picture. So usually, and this is the case of blacklists and self-exclusion lists, usually we are dealt with not so great images to work with. And that's sometimes all the customer has. So you know that ultimately facial recognition systems are working with a threshold that is what we use to determine whether the face belongs to Jimmy, and in this case it does or doesn't. So that threshold operates in a way to distinguish those results. And when you have a less than ideal face, the general approach to try to get results for that person is to lower thresholds, right? To open up the possibility of finding someone in less than ideal conditions. But when you do that, you compromise the integrity of the entire system and open the door to more false positives, right? It's not a cooked up recipe, it's more of a threshold, exactly, a threshold game. So we use something we call close matches, which is we relax a little bit your thresholds and display close alternatives for those results with less than ideal qualities. And the reason we do that is because if I now look at this result and I confirm this result to be my colleague Sebastian, by virtue of adding just an extra face to his identity, I make his identity better and I increase my chances of getting him the next time. So again, little things that we can do using the technology we have already running in your servers for recognition, but also using metadata in a smart way, we can help you make your identities better. And this is ultimately where we want Nirovision to be great at. So with an ML team on site, you can rest assured we always work on making facial recognition the best possible facial recognition ever. We'll work hard on integrations as well, but we're also improving the way that you operate the system with to make it easy to use, simple, and to get you quick results as quick as possible. And this is what temperatures look like in Nirovision. So just by linking a thermal camera to it, we consume metadata and we mix it with our facial recognition pipeline. And when we do that, then we can assign a temperature read to a recognition result, and we can store that in individuals' profiles for later review or playback. And because we have a thermal camera as well connected to the system, you can configure a temperature alarm. So temperature alarms, again, could be a general absolute threshold like we just discussed, or it could be a deviation of baseline if you have such a thing enabled, but it could also mean an alarm to be alerted on a label or an identity, something similar that you can achieve also on the DW platform. So this is where you control your metadata fields. As you can see, you can create any type of fields to store information at. And once this is set up, then you have your identities, you start collecting your activity results, and you are good to go. So before jumping into the DW Spectrum and the platform, I want to give people a chance. Is there any questions or anything that we should be looking at?
So a couple questions that have come in, but in terms of the number of points that you need to get a good facial recognition.
You mean data points in the sense of the size of face?
Correct. Yeah, the data points on the face.
Oh, perfect. So in terms of faces, we recognize and detect faces of minimum 40 by 40 pixels. So this is a very rough and lax way of saying it because it's a proportion on the width of the frame, but roughly 40 by 40 is a good number. So we will recognize and detect faces of that size onwards. But that being said, the faces that are used for identities, we require them of being a minimum of 110 by 110 pixels. And the distinction between the two actually is faces of that size of 110 by 110 minimum are of good quality in terms of size to belong to the identities and to be good at identifying people afterwards. So if your identity is comprised of those quality images, then when you try to recognize smaller size faces, the system works great. When it comes to number, we recommend having between 5 and 7 faces in identities, and that becomes even more prominent if you have cameras that yield very distinct faces. So for example, a camera like this, which is very illuminated, but maybe you have a camera like this one, a bit duller. So if they yield very different looking faces, you're better off adding one example of each. That being said though, single face identities also work, and features like the close match functionality that I was showing you before can help you get to that 5 faces minimum to make that even better. So data point wise, as long as you have at least a single face in the identity, we start collecting events from it. Every time I am recognized, so every time someone that's in the system is recognized and a face is big enough to be added to identities, we expose that too. So for example, if you were looking at my identity and you needed to add more faces to myself, I could even open it up to close matches and relax the thresholds and find more. But we still expose that even at the identity level, so you can quickly select a few faces you need and add them straight. So again, coming back to this, the smarts around the app to help you get to that number as quickly as possible.
Okay. So is there, the question came in as far as how many identities can you have? Is there a limit to them in the database?
We, there's no limit. So we help you spec out the server to run Nirovision on based on that number. You're going to see that, and you, as we start working together, you're soon going to find out that's my first question. My first question is usually, how many cameras are you interested in using in the system, and what's the volume of identities? So to put things in perspective, our average facial recognition setup usually is comprised of 1 to 4 cameras, usually covering choke points, and the average system, at least that we have implemented so far, has between 1,000 and 10,000 identities. Usually you want to track a distinct group of people. So we have customers that want to keep an eye on just VIPs or just your blacklist or your banned list. So it depends, but by the time we get to the quote and the sizing conversation, you will end up with a definite number for hardware that I will be able to provide you with.
Okay. And so, sorry, just going back a little bit on the data points, of the face, the next question that would come in, and I think what he's asking is, so right now you're just, Nirovision is focusing on facial recognition. So that's right. The question was about body mechanics or pose, skeletal.
I misunderstood. Yeah.
No, it was the way I asked it. I asked it intentionally the first time, but just to come back to it, it was kind of, if you guys are working on the, gait and body mechanics as far as an identification method with additional points.
I understood now, and the answer is not yet, but that is something that we're very interested in investigating, mainly because of how easy it is sometimes to distinguish, how difficult it is sometimes to distinguish someone from just the face, whereas having some sort of body component on it could help us distinguish two people more. So it is a very interesting problem, but we don't have any solution for it yet. We've approximated a similar approach by letting you zoom in your activity to different levels, but yeah, I understand what that question is, and definitely not. That being said, again, something we're interested in is making facial recognition better. So maybe we'll come up with a solution like that in the near future.
Sure you will.
All right. I think maybe it's a good time to jump to the integration itself. So if there are any more questions coming through, please let me know. But in terms of the integration, we developed it in C++ using the Metadata SDK. So we've been very, very early adopters of the Meta SDK, mainly because we believe that Nirovision in itself is a great solution, but of course you can enhance it and make it your own by linking the systems that you want to it. And your VMS is such an important key part of your security system that it makes perfect sense that you want this metadata there as well. So We truly think there are use cases for the app by itself, but it's way better when you link it to your security system, just by virtue of how much storage you get. So we have both Ubuntu and Windows installers available that take care of your dependencies, and you can be up and running with it a minute and a half. I did a video on YouTube about that. You can go find it if you'd like. Of course, we support DW Spectrum, that's what we're here for. And we recommend version 4.1 onwards because we have dashboard widgets, and we take advantage of the revamp of the embedded browser functionalities that 4.1 gave us. So to use the system, we recommend 4.1 onwards. So to set up Nirovision with DW Spectrum, what you need to do is you install the plugin on your server. And once you install it on the server that's hosting cameras, you enable recording on those cameras because, of course, you know, analytic plugins need recording enabled to store metadata results. So we need recording enabled. And once you enable the plugin on a camera, it will automatically create that camera and configure it in Nirovision. So once you get to that step, there's nothing to do except for go ahead and create rules and start getting objects into the system. This plugin, version 1.6 that I'm talking about, it's of course our 6th release and includes what we call Nirovision widgets. So using the embedded browser features, you can load both your activity view and your identity stub, the two things we've just looked at, in the DW Spectrum environment. So you could do exactly what I've shown you Nirovision could do without having to leave the DW client. But at the same time, what you're interested, of course, is metadata. So what metadata do we sync through? We sync custom events, and those custom events are for recognition results, so all the positive matches, unknowns, so all those results we couldn't match against your database, and temperature events. So you can use any of these 3 types of custom events to create rules, as you very well know how to do, and trigger any subsequent action, which could be a defined action or just an HTTP post. And then if you want to do further investigation, you can open up one of the widgets and open up the activity view to review it. But also we sync face objects, and face objects come with identity metadata, of course. Not every single field makes it to DW Spectrum yet, but we're working with the technical team, and also thanks to the feedback from the community. So I hope Meta evolves alongside us. So face objects synced into DW Spectrum come with bounding box coordinates. So you can use smart search functionality to find bounding boxes that were crossing a specific area in the frame. And we sync identity metadata consisting of names. So identity names, if you have such, or the identificator you chose to name them with, labels, and temperature information if it's available. I included, of course, 2 images of what that looks like in the system, because of course I didn't want Murphy's Law to come bite me in the case of Zoom or something freezing. But this is what it looks like, and I'm going to jump to the platform right after this to show you. My face is synced. We sync both labels in this case because I have 2, but you can sync as many labels as you like, and that means you can use the search feature in the objects panel to search by identity name or label and find activity, and we sync the temperature as well. When it comes to the custom event syncs through a custom elevated temperature event, and that's the one that I'm triggering here with my colleague. You see my red bounding box is there because my forehead was hot, and the event looks like this. You get an you get an abnormal temperature entry on the notification panel, and the alert with the glaring in this case because that's the system action I've chosen with. So let me show you now, before talking about the architecture, what this looks like. So let's connect my client, and let's try to enter the password correctly because that would be that would be required. So I've opened up a few. These are my 2 thermal cameras. This is a thermal camera, and this is just a normal camera there. So as you see, in my events tab, I have recognition events for some of my colleagues. This is one of my feature requests. lately. This is my colleague's name is Francois. He's from France, and that special French character isn't supported in DW Spectrum just yet. But then you see that in any case we have the label and the name, and if we wanted to play video, we could play all these video clips as well for every single person. But then at the same time, in the objects panel, you get the faces. So if you search for me this morning, you find all the events as I was coming to the meeting with my coffee. You can see me arrive, and you can search for my name because it is there, but you could also search for a blacklist label if you wanted to, or and make sure that you can check the temperature results there as well. So any paired camera, once it's has the plugin enabled, allows you to set rules. So plenty of rules set up here. And as you see, we have 3 different event types: elevated temperature, recognized identity, and unknown identity. So you could use these events by themselves, or you can decide that you want to be alerted only if a blacklist person is around and just set that up. When it comes to the plugin itself, it's configured quite quickly. Let me see if I show you my system tab. There are a few variables in here that you need to configure that relate to your server and the IP address of your Nirovision server. So once you have that done, and that information is exposed to you via one of the tools we have for our partners, which is our partner portal, you get that set up. And the minute you have identities in the system, then you can start exploring those results and playing that back. And of course, you can leverage all the features that you're well familiar with. I'm wondering if there's anything around here you'd like me to show, or if I should jump back to the architecture of the system.
I think that's good. So just for the audience's information, unless you have, do you have the widget or the dashboard, or are we going to show that?
I can open it up, absolutely. Let me find it. I didn't load it this time, sorry, but I can definitely.
Yeah, sorry.
No, don't worry. Yeah, tell me, sorry.
So, sorry for the audience, while you're doing that, for the audience's, what she's showing here is version 4.1 with the plugin. Once you install the plugin, you'll see the objects tab up there right next to so she has events highlighted in the right panel. The objects tab becomes enabled once that plugin is installed. And that's what's going to display those bounding boxes and the information that's coming from the identity recognition, so that it shows up on screen. So you can turn that on and off as part of that.
Exactly.
Right.
And something we didn't mention, which is if you have more than a single plugin connected, metadata is treated in the same fashion. So that's one of the beauties of syncing this type of metadata to DW Spectrum, is the way you guys handle and mix and match metadata. So if you have a license plate recognition solution that you wanted to plug to this, combine it with Nirovision, and then trigger an access control output, for example, you could achieve all of that with the benefits of everything looking exactly the same, which is super convenient.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so when it comes to events, well, I'm showing you just a few events from my colleagues this morning, but you get the sense. I want to make an interesting point about architecture. So what we haven't discussed that yet, and it's Nirovision requires a server, and this server needs to be dedicated to us. So the server running Nirovision sits on your on-premise communications room of your customer, for example, and that server needs to run a GPU and a CPU. So we work with NVIDIA architectures for the time being, and the recommended GPUs then as a result are the NVIDIA GTX range. Which one depends again on the number of cameras you want to connect to the system and the volume of identities you want to keep track of. But that server isn't anything beyond mid-tier gaming machine. So it's not tens of thousands of dollars server. It's a combination of a CPU and a GPU that could accommodate the concrete use cases, and that's where I'm here for, to help you spec this out. We have a few example setups built that I can share with you, and I can help you brainstorm if you're not sure how many cameras it needs to be included. And then you can manage all of this when it comes to setting up the server, provisioning users, and configuring the system itself, but also troubleshooting your customer setups through one of the tools that I haven't shown you during this demo, but it's available and it's also a desktop app, which is called the Partner Portal. So if you become a Nirovision partner, that means you resell Nirovision to your customers, you have access to these two to manage those setups. And aside from that, that's all you need. So once you have that server connected, you set that server against your account, you install the plugin on the DW Spectrum server and enable it. And once that's set, because the plugin configures the cameras automatically, you're up and running. So that's pretty much what you need. And one of the main things that we get asked, and I imagine this community is wondering the same, is if you can set up Nirovision on the same server as DW Spectrum is, or on a virtual environment, and we don't support neither for the time being. So we need a separate server, which truthfully, it's very convenient for separation of concerns, but I understand that that is also, there's a downside because it has a requirement for a server as well. The server needs to be connected to the internet and the camera's LAN. So we usually include or request to include 2 network cards. And the way the system ultimately works is if you have Nirovision standalone, we take a copy of the camera's RTSP streams directly into the server for processing at the edge. And we push the metadata results to the cloud to trigger the notifications. But if you have Nirovision in the context of an integration to DW Spectrum, we take the copy of the cameras through DW Spectrum, and that way we can insert metadata in the appropriate timestamps when we process the results. So once we connect the plugin, we take a copy of the cameras to DW Spectrum, and off you go. You can trigger those results in the Nirovision platform, or you can trigger real-time results from the DW Spectrum platform as well. I wonder at this stage if there's anything I haven't mentioned that you think it's worth bringing up, because otherwise, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, you yeah, and you kind of got to it as far as you're gonna put a server on site, and it's gonna be parallel to the Spectrum media server
exactly.
to do the processing for the Nirovision product.
That's right.
The image libraries that you show are those are stored on that video server. So
yes, that's absolutely right.
In terms of the data resides on the customer's system.
Yes.
It's not sitting out there, right?
No, exactly.
And then, so how is Nirovision priced? Is in terms of its licensing model? Can you describe how that works? Absolutely.
So we sell Nirovision exclusively through resellers. So that's why usually the best way to get in touch with us, if you or anyone in your team is interested in finding out more, is to copy your local sales rep and bring me around. We price Nirovision based on the number of cameras that you connect to it, obviously, just mainly by virtue of how tricky the exercise becomes, the more variables you have to consider. To give you a reference, we classify the tiers based on how big they are, so how many cameras you're connected to them. A small setup of up to 4 cameras and 500 identities per site costs in the realm of 300 Australian or 300 USD per site per month or annually. So you can choose to pay in the way that you prefer. And because we work through resellers, then we engage with the reseller, and the reseller retains the contact with the customer. We usually sit on a tier 2 level of support as well. So that's why if right now what you're thinking is you have a project in mind that you're not sure if Nirovision is good for or not, or you have just a general idea of a technology you're looking for, but you're not sure if it's going to work, or on the contrary, you heard a few customer pain points and you don't know how to solve them, I am more than available to sit down and have a chat to discuss specific requirements or to brainstorm together. And also, if you want to set up the plugin yourself and you want to have maybe a demo unit set up in your office to play with it and experiment what the system looks like, I am also the one to reach out for that. So pricing wise, then it's ends up being a variable of how many cameras you want to connect to the system and how many identities you want to keep track of. And that'll be able to give you precise advice based on those precise numbers as well.
Yep. And so that's available now as far as from the early access standpoint. Okay. And then all for the dealers that are out there right now, you know, for the time being until we get to an official release of 4.1, you can contact me. This is Patrick, and I can get you access to the beta for 4.1 so that you can test them out concurrently with the Nirovision product.
Absolutely, I'll encourage you to give it a go because it's very. At least these latest embedded browser features have made it very quick to load web pages inside the system, but as well also having metadata that you can play with it's very interesting as well. So yeah, if you're interested in setting this up and you want to test the plugin, please make sure to message Patrick and let me know, and I'll send you the file as well.
Okay.
Awesome.
Any other questions out there for the audience?
As you said, Patrick, as well, if you have late questions coming as the days go by, also feel free to shoot them anyway, and we'll discuss them over email, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, so let me just see what this one is. Yeah, so yeah, any late questions we'll try to answer by email for that. So we appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us. Very interesting technology working with DW Spectrum.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.